Picture your garden in July. Not the pretty version you're imagining right now. The real one. Crispy edges. Wilted stems by 2 p.m. plants you pay good money for in April. Looking defeated by the 4th of July. Here's the problem nobody tells you at the garden center. Most of what's sold in spring is chosen for how it looks on the shelf that week, not for how it survives your actual summer. So today, I'm giving you 8 perennials to get in the ground this March, before the heat arrives, so their roots have time to go deep before the sky turns against them. These aren't just heat tolerant. These are plants that use summer heat as fuel. Real zone data, real planting windows, zero filler. Stay with me because number 1 on this list is the plant most gardeners plant in the wrong season entirely. And once you see why March changes everything, you won't make that mistake again. If you want more practical, no-nonsense plant guides like this one, subscribe now because I've got a whole season of these coming. Let's get into it. Plant number 8, Echinacea, the purple coneflower. If there's one plant that proves March planting changes everything, it's this one. Echinacea is native to the North American prairies, which means it evolved under exactly the conditions you're trying to protect your garden from: brutal summer sun, then rocky or clay-heavy soil, and months where rain simply doesn't show up. Planted in March, and by the time June heat lands, its taproot is already pushed down 12 to 18 inches, deep enough to pull moisture long after the surface soil has gone bone dry. Plant the same Echinacea in June instead, and you're asking a shallow-rooted transplant to face its first heat wave with none of that underground insurance built up. That's the entire argument for March planting in one plant. USDA hardiness runs zones 3 through 9, one of the widest ranges of any garden perennial you can buy, which means almost nobody watching this is excluded. The flowers are unmistakable, big daisy-form blooms in purple, pink, white, orange, or red, depending on variety, each with that spiky orange-bronze cone at the center. It blooms from June straight through September, right through the hottest stretch of the year, without slowing down. Here's the detail most gardening content skips entirely. Echinacea actually performs worse in rich, heavily fertilized soil. Extra nitrogen gives you tall, floppy stems that fall over by midsummer and fewer flowers overall. Lean, average soil gives you compact, upright growth and denser blooms. So for once, doing less to your soil is a scientifically correct move. Full sun, minimum 6 hours a day, is non-negotiable for strong flowering. Once established, and March planting is exactly how you get there, it needs essentially nothing from you through summer. Leave the seed head standing into fall and winter, and goldfinches will strip them clean, which means you're not just growing a flower, you're running a bird feeder that happens to be gorgeous from your kitchen window in December. Plant number 7, Rudbeckia, the black-eyed Susan. This is a plant that takes one of the hardest colors to use well in a garden, saturated golden yellow, and makes it look completely intentional. Rudbeckia produces bold daisy flowers with a dark brown or near black center, and it blooms from July all the way through October, which means it's still going strong long after most spring-planted annuals have burned out completely. USDA zones 3 through 9, the same broad range as Echinacea, and for the same reason. Both are prairie natives built for the same punishing summer conditions. Here's the golden information on this one. Rudbeckia is technically a short-lived perennial, meaning any individual plant might only stick around 3 or 4 years. But it self-seeds so reliably that new plants fill in before you've even noticed the old ones fading. You treat it like a permanent fixture because in every practical sense, it behaves like one. Planted in March, so the root system is established before the first real heat spike hits, and it will handle heavy clay soil better than almost anything else on this list, which matters if you're gardening somewhere with the kind of soil that makes roses sulk. It's also one of the most valuable late-season nectar sources for native bees, feeding them right when other flowers have finished and pollinators are scrambling to build reserves before fall. You're not just filling color in your border. You're filling a real gap in your local food web at exactly the moment it matters most. Plant number 6, Salvia nemorosa. If you want a plant that looks like it was professionally placed in your garden with zero effort on your part, this is it. Salvia sends up tidy, upright spikes of deep violet, purple, or white flowers starting in late spring. And here's the trick that makes it earn its spot on a heat list specifically. Cut it back by about a third after the first flush fades in early summer. right as the real heat is settling in, and it blooms within a few weeks, often just as strong the second time. Some gardeners get 3 full bloom cycles out of one plant between May and September. That's an extraordinary return from one March planting. USDA zones 4 through 8 cover most of the country for this one. Salvia is genuinely drought tolerant once established, resists deer, and stays compact without staking, no floppy stems collapsing in a summer storm. The aromatic foliage is part of the reason deer leave it alone, and it's also part why it holds up so well in heat. Plants with strong aromatic oils in their leaves tend to lose less water to the hottest part of the day. Planted in full sun with decent drainage in March, and by the time the real summer arrives, you're not managing a fragile new transplant. You're watching an established plant do exactly what it evolved to do. Plant number 5, Coreopsis, specifically the threadleaf varieties like Moonbeam and Zagreb. If you have a spot that gets blazing all-day sun where other plants look defeated by noon, this is your answer, not a good option, the answer. Coreopsis produces a cloud of cheerful yellow, daisy-formed flowers over fine, ferny foliage, and with regular deadheading. It can bloom continuously from May clear through October. That's 5 straight months of color from plant that, once established through a March planting, asks for almost nothing. USDA zones vary by species, but the threadleaf types run reliably in zones 3 through 9, and Zagreb in particular is known for handling summer heat and drought better than nearly any other Coreopsis variety sold. Here's the detail that explains everything about why it performs the way it does. Coreopsis is native to the southeastern United States, and it's the official state wildflower of Florida, which tells you exactly what kind of heat it was built to shrug off. It evolved in flat, sandy, nutrient-poor ground under relentless sun, which means it actually prefers infertile, well-drained soil. Rich, amended garden beds work against it, causing root rot and floppy growth. If you got a hot, dry, sandy patch where nothing else has succeeded, that's not a problem spot. That's the ideal Coreopsis habitat waiting to be used properly. Divide clumps every 2 to 3 years in spring, and if you occasionally forget to deadhead, it's fine. It will just bloom for a slightly shorter window, which for a plant explicitly built for neglect seems more than reasonable. Plant number 4, the daylily. If you could only plant one perennial this March and needed it to work in almost any condition, most experienced gardeners would hand you a daylily without hesitation. Each individual flower lasts exactly 1 day, hence the name, but mature clump produces dozens, sometimes over 100 buds across a season, which means you get rolling, continuous color for weeks at a stretch from one plant. And that clump gets bigger and more floriferous every single year, without you doing anything differently. USDA zones 3 through 9, with some modern heat-bred hybrids pushing into zone 10 with a little afternoon shade protection. Daylilies handle clay, sandy, or loamy soil equally well, tolerate drought once established, and shrug off poor soil fertility entirely. Here's the golden information most channels skip. There are over 80,000 registered daylily cultivars, and the wild orange ditch lily you see naturalized along highways is essentially indestructible but spreads aggressively and is considered invasive in parts of the Northeast and Midwest. For a managed front or backyard, choose a named hybrid instead. Stella de Oro is one of the most widely sold perennials in North American history. Compact, reblooming from June through September, and hardy to zone 3. Planted in March. Give it a season to establish before the heat lands. And by July, you'll have a plant that's not just surviving your summer. It's the thing your whole border is built around. One important note if you have cats. Every part of the daylily, flowers, leaves, pollen, even vase water, is severely toxic to them and can cause acute kidney failure. If you have outdoor cats, choose something else on this list instead. Plant number 3, catmint, specifically Walker's Low. I want to make a case for this plant that I don't think gets made clearly enough anywhere else. Catmint might be the single best value for effort flowering perennial you can plant in March, and I'll stand behind that completely. It blooms from late May through July in cascading waves of lavender blue flowers, and once that first flush fades right as summer heat is peaking, you shear back by about half, and within 4 to 5 weeks you get a second full flush from August through October. That's effectively 2 entire blooming seasons from one plant, timed perfectly around the hottest, most punishing stretch of the year. USDA zones 3 through 8. Walker's Low won the Perennial Plant Association's Plant of the Year award, and it earned that recognition honestly. Here's the detail that genuinely surprises people. Catmint is more drought-tolerant than lavender. Once it's been in the ground for 6 to 8 weeks, which a March planting gives you plenty of time for before summer arrives. You can stop watering it almost entirely in most temperate climates, and it will be completely fine. In Zone 6 through 8, where summer humidity stresses out Mediterranean plants like lavender, catmint consistently outperforms it. Because catmint tolerates that heat and humidity combination that lavender's genetics were never built for. If you've tried lavender in a humid zone and lost it, plant catmint in that same spot instead. You'll get a nearly identical visual effect with dramatically more reliability. It's also one of the top nectar sources for bumblebees and independent university pollinator studies. So, a mass planting in full bloom will genuinely hum with activity you can hear from a distance. Plant number 2, lantana, in the zones where it survives as a true perennial. This is a plant that most gardeners in cooler climates only know as a summer annual, and that's exactly why it deserves a spot on this list. Because in zones 8 through 11, it comes back reliably year after year, and it might be the single toughest heat performer of anything you'll plant this March. Lantana produces dense clusters of small, multicolored flowers, often shifting from yellow to orange to pink to red on the same cluster as the blooms age, which gives it a constantly shifting, layered color effect that no other plant on this list replicates. It blooms from spring straight through the first frost, in some warm zones essentially year-round. Here's the golden information on this one. Lantana doesn't just tolerate extreme heat, it genuinely prefers it. Growth and flowering actually slow down in cooler, wetter weather and ramp up as temperatures climb into the 90s. This is one of the very few ornamental perennials where a brutal, prolonged heat wave makes the plant perform better, not worse. Plant it in March in zones where it's hardy. Give it full sun and well-drained soil, and by peak summer, it will be blooming harder than it was in spring. It's also remarkably deer-resistant and drought-tolerant once established, and butterflies are consistently drawn to it in large numbers. One caution worth knowing: in some warm coastal and southern regions, certain lantana varieties can naturalize aggressively. So if you're in zones 9 through 11, look specifically for sterile or low-fruiting cultivars bred for garden use rather than the wild-type species. And that brings us to number 1. The plant most gardeners plant in entirely the wrong season, and once you understand why, you'll never make that mistake again. Ice plant Diliosperma. If you've ever seen a slope or a rock garden absolutely carpeted in electric magenta, orange, or purple flowers in the middle of the hottest, driest weeks of summer, it was almost certainly ice plant. This is a low-growing, mat-forming succulent perennial, and it might be the single most heat and drought-adaptive flowering plant you can put in the ground. The flowers are almost unnaturally vivid, daisy-formed blooms in shades most other perennials simply can't produce, and they open in full sun, closing on cloudy days and at night, which means on a hot, bright July afternoon, exactly when you want your garden to be performing, ice plant is putting on its biggest show. Here's why March is a critical window for this plant specifically, and why so many gardeners get it wrong. Most people buy ice plant on impulse in June or July, when it's already blooming at the garden center and looks irresistible. But planting in the middle of summer heat, before the root system has had any time to establish, is exactly backwards. Ice plant needs a period of cool, moist spring soil to send down the fine root network that later lets it survive on almost no water at all. Plant it in March. Let it settle in during the mild weeks before summer, and by June it's fully self-sufficient. Plant the same specimen in July, and you're asking an unestablished plant to face brutal heat with none of that groundwork done. And it very often fails, which is exactly why so many people wrongly conclude ice plant is fussy or unreliable. USDA hardiness depends heavily on variety and drainage. Generally, zones 5 through 9 for the hardier types like Diliosperma cooperi and Diliosperma nibigenum, the winter wet, not winter cold, is what actually kills this plant. Give it sharp drainage, ideally a slope, raised bed, or gravelly soil, and it will survive far colder winters than its own rating suggests. It thrives in the poorest, leanest, driest soil you have, the kind of ground where almost nothing else will grow, and it spreads steadily to form a dense, weed-suppressing mat that needs essentially zero maintenance once established. Bees are consistently drawn to the open, flat blooms, and because the foliage is succulent and water-storing, it handles weeks without rain the same way sedum does. If you got a hot, sun-blasted slope, a gravel strip, or a spot where your hose simply doesn't reach. Ice plant planted this March is how you turn that liability into the most eye-catching part of your entire yard by midsummer. That's why it's number one. So here's how these 8 actually work together across the season. Echinacea and Rudbeckia carry the structural backbone of your border from June through October. Both prairie natives built for exactly this kind of heat. Salvia and catmint give you 2 full red bloom cycles each. Time so their second flush lands right in the hottest part of summer when most gardens start looking tired. Coreopsis fills in with nonstop yellow from May through October in your hottest, sunniest, most neglected patch. Daylilies give you rolling color and near total drought tolerance from a single clump that only gets bigger with time. Lantana, if your zone allows it, actually ramps up its performance as the heat intensifies, doing the opposite of what most flowering plants do. And ice plant carpets your driest, most impossible ground in color precisely when everything else is struggling, provided you get in the ground now, in March, while the soil is still cool enough to let it build the roots it needs. That's the underlying principle behind every plant on this list. None of them are fighting the heat. They're built around it. And the only real trick is giving their root systems a head start before summer forces the issue, which is exactly what planting in March buys you. Roots that establish in cool, moist spring soil are dramatically more resilient than roots try and get established while simultaneously fighting off 90-degree heat. That's not luck, and it's not some secret gardening trick. It's just giving each plant the timing it actually evolved for. So here's the challenge. Don't try to plant all 8 this March. Pick 3 that match your zone, your soil, and the toughest, most neglected spot in your yard. Get them to ground now. Water them consistently for the first few weeks while the roots settle in, and then genuinely step back. Come back to this video in August, and you'll wish you'd planted all 8 back in March. If any of this helped you, or if you've already got one of these plants and want to share how it's held up in your yard, drop in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the moment, because every week I put out exactly this kind of practical, zone-specific plant guide. No filler, no recycled tips. Thanks for spending a few minutes with me today. Now, go get your hands in the soil, because what you plant this March is what your July garden is going to thank you for.